Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm very happy to welcome my guest this time is Tim, who got in contact with me some time ago. And Tim, you had a really extraordinary and interesting experience while out hiking. Now, I do get a number of these emails from people who talk about experiencing various, phenomena while they're out hiking. So it's great that you're happy to come and talk to me today. And I'd love it if you could introduce your story. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on. It was, I'll go into the story. I just felt it was important to me after it happened to just try to connect with somebody about it, which is how I came across you and drop you that email. Yeah. So I'll just go on to it. So it's earlier this year. I enjoy hiking. I love to get out into nature for that. I live in London, so getting out into real nature is good. And I'm fortunate enough that I get to travel quite a lot with my work. So I was in Arizona and area around Sedona, and it's a beautiful part of the world and just a beautiful natural landscape. Very, very, very strange. It's a very magical place. It's there's lots gathered around there with the vortices and the feeling, and it's a place when you're walking amongst it, you can't help but just feel that nature's alive around you. Anyway, I'd gone for a walk. I wasn't as well organized as I'd often be on these. I was setting out for quite a long walk, about 15 miles or so, and I didn't head off till lunchtime. You should normally go in the morning for that because you're going to be 5-6 hours plus, and you're working from a map. And it's not wild wilderness, but it's big country. So, and I was hiking, and I was about 12 miles into the walk. And it was pretty strenuous. You'd gone up over the snow lines, quite a high climb, and by now I was getting pretty tired. I was pretty worn out, and I was coming down from the higher areas right the way down into a valley area by a creek, and I guess the first thing that I was became aware of myself, if you like, rather than aware of my surroundings. I mean, obviously, when you're out amongst beautiful nature, you're very aware of your surroundings. You're in the countryside. You're in the space you're in. That's one of the reasons why it's so wonderful to do. But I became very aware, just aware in something in myself that I felt just a drop of spirits. And it was, just a real tiredness. I mean, I was getting weary and looking forward to getting to the end and planning what I was going to eat. But this was different. It was a sudden bone weariness. And it was very much in my spirit and my will. It was almost like a cloud of depression dropped over me. And it was enough that it actually made me stop and just say to myself, what the hell's going on? Because I'm in this beautiful place, beautiful landscape, had a great walk. I'm tired, but I'm looking forward to it. And it was just this real drop. So I stopped and just sat down on a rock, and I just questioned myself, maybe I've not been eating enough. I've been drinking water all the time, but maybe it's just a drop in blood sugar, whatever. So I stopped and I took out an energy bar and started eating that. And I look back behind me, and on the whole walk, on the whole hike, there'd been a period at the start of it, which is very layered trails, and you see a fair few people and the odd, people, there's even tracks up there that people can go in little buggies. But that was way back. And I hadn't seen anybody for probably 5-6 miles or so.
Yeah.
And I sat back and looking back the way I came, the trail came through a few trees, and it was getting to the first point of these creeks where I'd come across the water, and out of the path where I'd been, a guy just stepped out and started crossing the stones towards where I was. And the first thing that hit me was he just looked so bizarrely out of place in kind of a funky, goofy kind of way. He was wearing a bright red hair, deep, when you get deep sort of copper red hair, a sort of goofy look. That's the only way I can describe it. tiny little funny cap turned up, tight, short shorts, like short, shiny running shorts rather than hiker gear. And just the whole thing, he just looked a bit, he came hiking across and he just looked at me very clearly, very much in the eye and jolly. And he just said, yeah, how are you? And it was just a very direct, how you doing? And I was like, eating my bar. And I was actually feeling pretty kind of awful. But I just said, I'm English, obviously. So I said, oh, I'm fine, as you do in a sort of an offhand way. And he just said, you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm good. And he was like, okay. And he just skipped off, literally skipped off and went skipping off around the path towards the way I was going. And I was just sitting there shaking my head because I was like, he was just so out of place. The image that was conjured up in my mind was like, what is he doing here? He should be, it's like somebody you'd see on some late 70s, early 80s disco scene in New York on, I don't know why, but that was just the strong image was he's like a disco kid from New York. What's he doing in the middle of this trail? And I was just like, okay, fine. And I didn't think much more about it. And I sort of, had my bar pepped. I was like, right, okay, let's go. So, and that was the kind of all of the interaction that happened then. But then my walk then became, a little bit strange and a bit challenging. A couple of other odd things started with. An odd thing happened combined to quite a dramatic thing for myself, or what could have been. So I headed on from there, and I was coming down this creek, and I had my map out, and I was looking on the map, and the map said the trail just goes straight across the creek, and then you're at the other side, and then you get on the rest of the trail, and you come back down. I'm like, okay. So I follow the trail down to the creek, which is from there only it's no more than 30 meters from where I stopped. I was pretty much at it.
Yeah.
I got around to where the creek is and where the track goes through the creek, and the creek was 40 feet across and in full flood rush. Of course, giving it a bit of thought, it was the first hot day. I'd been up above the snow line. It had been a strangely hot weather, and all the snow melt from all the higher ground was coming down and feeding the creek. Mm. And I was just looking across to it, and I was just like, right, okay. There's no way I'm getting across there. You even think for a moment, it's like, I haven't got a rope. If I had a rope, maybe you could get it tied on the other side and you could do it and you could see some rocks, but there was no chance that you could walk through it. You'd have been washed away. If you'd have done it, if there's a few of you and you might have taken it and you had got some sticks, you might have had a go, but there was no way. It was in full flow. I was like, okay, fine. So you do the next things, you track down the water, you track down to the left, and pretty quickly, the cliffs build back up through it. I'd gone through the trail map, which I had the physical one and all the ones I had online, and there was no other trails marked that go anywhere other than straight across the water. I went to the right and I did the same. And then as I get to the right, there's, the water, it's only 40 feet across or so. And on the other side, there's another trail area. And there's a group of, young guys over the other side. And I'm like, and it's loud enough that you couldn't hear anyone across it. You'd have to really shout. You get an idea. The rush of the water was so loud that you really would have to shout to get any attention. And I looked across to this group of these guys the other side, and they just looked like, early 20 something or so, not just teenagers, but there was just something odd about them. And they were just sort of jumping around and kind of, I don't know, there was just something a little bit, inhuman and kind of odd about it, even though they were dressed quite normally. And I shouted across to get across where I was, and they looked up, and the faces were just kind of angry. And so I was calling again. I was like, do you know if there's any other way around here? Is it any other? And all they started picking up stones and throwing them across, like big rocks, as far as they could. There was no way they could get the rocks across, but they were just throwing them. There was no engagement. It was just this, banging sticks. And the odd image that comes to mind when I think of it is the apes at the start of 2001 in the scene, and they were just there was no engagement, no language, no communication. It was just very strange. And as I say, when I was calling out that I was like, yeah, I need a bit of help. I'm struggling to get across. I don't know if there's any other way. And all they were doing, just throwing things and just, like, okay, forget it. And it was strange. And anyway, I go up and down. I go a few hundred meters the one way. It's blocked off a few hundred meters the other way. And at this stage, it's now 4:30, coming to 5 o'clock. It's February, so although it's kind of been a sunny day, it's going to be very, very cold at night. I've got 8% battery. I've just had my last energy bar, and it just hits me then. It's like, right, okay, the only way back is the way I came. So that's 12 miles, starting out with a 2,000-foot climb back up over the snow line. And I've got about an hour and 40 minutes before the light goes. So at that stage, you just hit into that mode, turn around, get my head down, hike as fast as I can, getting up there. And as I get to the top of it, and you're starting to hit the bigger trails, and you know that you're over the worst of it, and you're like, even if it gets dark now, I'm fine. It wasn't until I got up there, I was just like, where did that guy go? He'd gone past me. There was no more than 40 meters. There was nowhere else to go. Now, okay, I think about it. I'm a fairly sort of rational-minded person in most aspects. That sounds, for want of a better word. Or, I'll lay up. Oh, well, okay, let's think this through. But I didn't feel any need to at all. And I know ordinarily my way of thinking would be, explore it. But the moment I was up there, and I was like, it didn't matter where he went. Because he wasn't there in that way. It was just like, he's just like, a good spirit. There was just an innate assumption that I didn't need a reason, that it was okay. There was nothing to worry about. He wasn't in trouble. There was nothing else that had happened. He was just, it was just an innate moment to understand that. And I hiked off and went on my way. And then one of the oddest things about this for me was the fact that I didn't think any more about it. I didn't think any more about that for a while until following up from it. Then each time that I did, I was just like, no, something quite wonderful happened there. But oddly, it's like my mind couldn't quite, it's quite slippery in the memory. I'd kind of get on with other things. And it was only really, a little afterwards, and I spoke to my wife about it, and a couple of friends I mentioned it to, and in each case was, I'm very open to it, but it was very easy to just go, yeah, okay, there was just that, and it's not haunted me since in any way, but it's intrigued me since, and it's led to a lot of conversations and connections with people around it, and was it and led me to just occasionally keep pulling at that thread, and that thread's pulled at me. It's been part of a sort of journey of discovery in other aspects since then. And so the more I sort of reflect, and it reflects back on me, it's starting to become something quite, a symbolic moment for myself, because I can track back to all sorts of other changes in myself, which, whether it's a trigger for or seem to be related to it. So it's come at a time in my life of kind of change and exploration and mystery, if you like, and it feels quite close to it. And then and then just occasionally the images come back from it as well, and they feel quite, personally quite profound. Even the inhumanity of the people across the other side, the very, very, very real sense of danger, what that was there for me, in what way, and and I've reflected on it in all sorts of ways since then.
Thank you so much. It's really great to hear that. And, when I first received your email, I could see it all the way that you had described it. So there's a quality to it. And in the same way that there's kind of several layers to it. Because initially it feels like your first warning is kind of bodily. Something, your energy drops, something has shifted. Did you notice anything else about yourself or the environment at that point when you had that first realization?
I think it was you're just I suppose, I just crossed some water.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a beautiful little area. There's little, so you're descending down into the trees. The main thing I felt about myself at that point, no, it was not much beyond this, just a really arresting feeling of, as I say, not just tiredness. It was a a sapping of all energy, mental energy, the kind of libido, will, everything. It was the whole thing went, and mood all in one go. And it was so arresting that it did make me stop. I mean, as I say, the only other thing, when you think about this, it's, the country that I was in, it was just out of some rocks, down some trees, going over the water. Was there any? I can't think of anything else that really triggered at that point. It was just that. It was the speed with which my mood and energy had changed. It wasn't a slow drag. It was whoa.
Yeah. Ground to a halt. And so you're kind of stopped in your tracks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in effect, your body kind of stopped you in your tracks too. The energy drops. I think it's interesting that you've crossed the water. I mean, we see a lot of connection with water in a lot of these stories. If you have listened to Encounter Along the Thames, there are many other stories as well, but there seems to be these very sort of strange, I call them kind of pokey energies that are around some places, bodies of water, water spots.
They're also classic sort of boundary places.
Yeah.
Well,
yes, exactly.
Sort of,
Exactly. Between
that sense,
it's liminal between the land and the water. You've crossed over. You've kind of made that connection in some way with the water. Your body drops and gives you a very clear message that something is up. To the point where you sit down and start to question yourself. And is it just that I'm hungry? Okay, I'm going to try this and see if that works. And then this character arrives in a way that it would be difficult to not acknowledge his presence, because not only does he look like he's stepped out of some other world, some other place and time, but he then comes up and he's checking with you. It's like if you could send somebody to give you a tip off. He's kind of doing that in a sense. Are you okay? He's asking the question that you're asking yourself. Am I okay? Yeah. Are you okay? He's kind of driving that home. And it's like there's two warnings there already. Yeah. And then and then you go down to the crossing and realize that it's just impossible. And again, there's these group of men, young men over the other side that are again just, there's no way that you would want to cross now, even if you could, to get to that side.
Warded off.
Really warding you off
at that point. Yeah.
In a way that they weren't getting their message across, and but physically they were scaring you off going over. But in that moment for you, it was very threatening. But the effect, if you look at the effect of it, it was to stop you crossing.
Yeah.
Even if it's going to.
Don't try it. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't try it. Don't try it. It's that they presented the danger, even if what you could see before you wasn't clear enough that the danger was there. And it's the kind of the drop. I'm thinking about with the idea of the Oz factor. You have a sense where people will have gone from one state of being to another, or from one world to another. So it's possible that this drop in spirits, this drop in energy, can suddenly perhaps make you feel as if you've dropped into another sort of state in some way. these are all kind of tips that might point towards, or hints that might point towards, this being an encounter with an otherworldly being. But I think what's most clear is that you felt it in yourself about this guy. And, reaching the top, you have this realization that, oh, yeah, of course, he wasn't a real being. Yeah.
Which then leads you onto, and the reason I say that is because I think this, I'm a philosophical person. I'm somebody who explores a lot of these things. And, you realize anybody who's a thoughtful person and has been through any experiences of any sort outside of the mundane, that question of what is real is a very intriguing mystery, which can open up all manner of, interesting, directions for how we engage with the mystery of the world. And it's, it's funny, before we spoke today, I was trying to think of the order of my thoughts of the time what I was going through before this happened.
Right.
And then I think about the order of the thoughts of what I do since. And obviously these days, I mean, I read a lot, I write a lot, I think a lot, but I went through my YouTube watchings from the periods before it and the periods after it. And I mentioned when we got in touch that one of the reasons that I'd found you was because you came up in two different searches, which I'd done within a few days. And one was when I was looking for, well, I've met a spirit on a trail. Where might that resonate? And your podcast came up. And just a few days before, I'd been looking into other conversations with Patrick Harpur, and your podcast came up because of your interview with Patrick. And the reason I mentioned that is because I was trying to look back and think, well, I was very intrigued by and very interested with Patrick Harpur's ideas, and his writing and thought has really influenced me. But I was thinking, was it before or after? Where was that interest? And interestingly, a couple of the key things which I now know very well and have looked at and listened to more fully with Patrick's work, a couple of those had been in my searches and in my YouTube feed before the event, but I'd got no more than a few minutes into either of them. So it wasn't resonating with me. My feed prior to that was a lot more analytical. And in fact, one of the ways I came across Patrick is through a very analytical philosopher and thinker who has who really values Patrick's work. And prior to what happened to me, it wasn't quite working for me. Since it happened to me, that aspect of life has just opened up way more as well. And the reason I say that is so much in my thinking, in my reflections on the moment, was an element of my harder-headed self needed to be opened up more in order to be true to myself. And I do feel that what happened to me in Arizona in its small way has done the job. It's pulled me away from a tendency perhaps for being over analytical. It's not, I've always had other experiences, and I'm not a logical positivist sort of rational reductionist by any stretch of the imagination, but there's definitely been a sort of it's opened up the reality of the depth in a way which hadn't been there for many, many years for me, I think.
It's wonderful to hear that, because I'm also thinking about the way, the kind of the turning back, and that all of these interactions, they were all with young men. And I'm wondering about, the point in your life when you might have gone on a certain path and left a certain path. And the man that turned up initially, that spoke to you, he is the complete opposite of what you're kind of describing too. This sort of perhaps a bit more of a sensible person that goes out in sort of sensible, hiking wear and and this guy, he sounds like a very vibrant character and not to be ignored. And there's something about his energy that seems to sort of tally with the sort of path that you are now exploring, that there's more, outside of and not limited to, and a vibrancy to it, the vibrancy of life.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, the young man, because and we've had a couple of communications over the months since then, and in the number of times when I've been thinking about it, and I've spoken about it to a few of the people who are close to me, there's other memories that come up. You think, oh, actually, hang on, something like this has happened to me before, and a very, very strong memory that came to it, and only through describing it, only through speaking about it, and actually, acknowledging, what I feel about the experience, and sharing it, did it suddenly trigger a memory? It's like, hang on a second, something very similar to this happened to me once before. So when did it happen? And that's the bit that was being one of the, right, okay, I remember when this happened to me before. So when I was, I guess, when would it have been? 25 years ago? No, more than that. It was sort of mid-90s, post-university. Actually, you know what? It was actually during university. I dropped out of university for a year and partway through some, that's a long story, but went back afterwards. But during that time, I had a really profound experience, which is definitely, one of those turning points or guide moments in my life in many ways, which is cut a long story relatively short, but I'd spent a period of time after I dropped out working very, very hard, doing physical work, doing a job, 70, 80 hours a week. Wasn't really sure where I was going. Do I want to go back to university? And a lot of these thoughts are going through your head. I was working very, very hard. And I had what's, fairly classical religious experience. It happened out one night, or mystical experience, which is, I was out, in a pub, not really drinking. I was on the end of, I'd worked solidly for 14 days, where I was out in the evening. And I had fairly classical, by the William James views, just a moment of, all of a sudden, just a profound, every one of my thoughts that's spinning around locked into a spin and expanded and expanded and expanded until it contained everything. And I was one with everything. And for that moment, the whole ineffable thing, I was connected. I knew everything. I was so energized. I saw so much in those moments that I left the pub. I ran for about a mile. I sat in a field. I grabbed some paper, and I went through this just remarkable experience. And then in the following days, it stayed with me. But as many people who have these experiences, you can't even hang on to the memory in full. You certainly can't hang on to the detail of it. But I came out of it with, as many people who have those sort of experiences of true oneness, that the universe is a yes, not a no. And it just fueled my life for years and years following that. I went back to university, and I've been relatively successful. But the main thing I've always had is a deep inner confidence of just, yes, I've always felt that the universe will lock in around us for what we need, because it's listening perpetually. And I had that feeling, and I lived that for a long time. And over the years, you grow up, you start a business, you've got other concerns. The left side of your brain jumps in a lot more. You get a lot more rational. Occasionally you remember it, but you almost put it away, or so if you're not careful, it can fade. And it's not that it was completely suppressed, but at that time when that happened, I had another experience the same week. I was getting up at, with the sun, and I was having to walk. I had to get out of being indoors when I had any time. And I remember one morning being up at about, I think this was probably before that experience happened to me, but around the same time. And I remember going for a walk in the countryside up in Worcestershire. I grew up. And I was sitting at the top of an orchard watching the sun come up and the mist come up on the field, and you get those lovely, 4:30 a.m. English summer's day dawn. And I remember sitting in the field and I was thinking, and I remember I was writing to somebody at the time. And I was looking up, and as you're sort of looking into the distance, and there was a guy walking up the hill. And I remember the image in my mind, there was a gypsy. And, and you have the archetypal gypsy image of this sort of, guy walking up across this field and with a stick. And I carried on, looked down, and I was writing. And then a little thought came in the back of my mind. I was like, what's he doing here at 4:30 in the morning where I am? And I looked up, and, orchards, very, very open trays. You can see right the way through. Nobody there at all. So it was a very small thing. And it was something that that memory had not been in my mind for 25, 26, 27 years. But a couple of months after, when I was reflecting more of what happened in Arizona, in a story, I was just like, it was the same feeling. It had exactly the same feeling as that moment. And that moment in my life was a turning point. The experience that came, I forget whether it was within a week or before or after, was a point when there was an enormous shift, change, and growth in myself. And it was in my youth, or a period of youth 25 years ago. So anyway, it's a bit of a digression, but in an odd way, in my mind, there is a resonance between when I see that gypsy in a field, which again, literally, it's not even a strong memory of mine, and what happened to me, I just know they have a like feeling, for sure.
It's one of the things I wanted to ask you, is there a sense of familiarity? And it makes total sense. And as I say, this idea with this young man and almost possibly being an aspect of yourself in some kind of way. And then the fact that you then got to turn back the way you came, which in effect you did in your life. You turned back, on the pass. You couldn't pass over. There was no way, forward that way. You needed to go up back the way you came. And I think that's, it's quite a sort of metaphorical type of.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it's, it's like, it's a wonderful sort of allegory across that, really, in many ways. When I think back to where I've needed to go to find an element of myself, it's been a strange, I wouldn't say strange. It's been a wonderful sort of journey of discovery and sort of reflecting on that since.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. This is what life really is about. This, I feel, happens to many of us, but we might not kind of acknowledge it and we might not notice it. But I'm in agreement with you that the universe is a yes, and that it's something that we can move with, and it's something that we can be aware of all the time, except that we're not taught that it's like that. I mean, thankfully, what do you think kind of opened you to that way of connecting with the world? Because it feels like there was something already innate within you. I'm wondering if maybe your family were that way inclined, where they kind of felt like the world is yes. There are messages you get from the people around you when you're growing up, and not to sort of, inquire about family life, and, that's all private. But I think that oftentimes, if we're brought up with the idea that, there's an outward, if you're outward looking and there's a kind of general sense of yes, or we can find that within ourselves in some way, it sets us up for a very different way of relating to the world and to our lives.
I think undoubtedly. I mean, I think there's something, I think there's a character in ourselves which we may sort of, there's something innate, but I think from those around us, I'd say my upbringing was always very positive. It was very, and in a relatively, for want of a better word, a simple way. It was not particularly spiritual, not particularly religious, but very warm, very open. I think open is one of the keys to it. It's so I always had that sort of unease. There was nothing judgmental. And I think even that small thing counts a lot. there's nothing, everything is acceptable, everything's possible, everything is open. So I think if you immediately have that, then some of your filters and your shutters are not in place. So you are more open to what can happen to you. I think, it's I guess on a personal level as well, I've always been, my brother used to, I remember my brother joking. I've gone from quite a large family. I remember him joking one day when we were all out as a family, like, how are we going to get back here? And he was like, oh, Tim will be all right. He'll follow the ley lines. So I think there's always been a bit of a feeling that I'm creative. It's what I do. So, and I think if you have that, people with the imaginative temperament have to be a little more open. Otherwise, the creativity is not going to be there. So I think that's always been something that's within me. I would, there's some other things around what's happened now, which, or more recently, I remember one of the questions you asked me was, is he familiar to you in any way? And I was like, does he remind me of anybody? I think that, and all of those things. Now, a few months ago, I was with a friend, and all of a sudden, we'd been for a walk on the beach, and I took a photograph of him, and I looked at the photograph in my phone, and there's some people who you see, you sort of, when you're with them day to day, you have a kind of image in mind how they look, and in a photo they look different slightly. There's something slightly different about somebody. And all of a sudden, the picture of my friend in the phone looked so much like the guy in Arizona. So now we go on to another thread in my life, which, for me is on a parallel with all of this. And that was in the summer of last year. I'd been going through a lot of personal sort of reflection on where did I lose my thread to the mystery, the yes. I felt that I was going through a stage where my life was becoming habitual. Even my creativity was, oh, well, I've got the answer to that because I've done that before. And I was solving problems with, a habit. And in the last couple of years, I've really been actively searching in myself. It's like, what have I lost contact with? And one of the things which I was doing after that, a couple of years ago, I started making inquiries to psychedelic guides in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
It's something which had been in my life when I was younger. Funnily enough, after my religious experience, I spent the next 2 years trying to understand what the hell had happened to me. And this was in Manchester in the early 90s. And it led me to William James. It led me to a lot of the thinking through the 60s. And if you start speaking about religious experiences and you start reading literature, quite closely, you start to get to thoughts on psychedelics. And so I'd explored that back in the 90s, always from a fairly philosophical point of view, and work, start a business, get a little older, have children or have a child, and it's sort of gone. And so a few years ago, I was like, I need to get back to this, not just, I need to get back to the connection mystery. And so I'd been exploring, and I've gone on a few journeys in Amsterdam, and I've done a few things and had some remarkable experiences, which are all part of my kind of reopening and reawakening of this element of myself, for sure. And one of the guides is the spitting image of the guy who I was there, the image that was formed, however the characterization or wherever this comes from, whichever element of myself, there's a real likeness with somebody who is my guide to the other world in another aspect of my life.
That's really powerful. Yeah, that is so powerful. And then and then, as you say, you can open to it even more because you can trust it. And once these things kind of line up like that, you can really step into it then, because it's just an acknowledgement that there is more, and there is more, and there is more. And you can just really sort of peel off the layers and move through. This is what life can be like. It's amazing. It is. It's just this opening of the mystery, and
And as I say, it's this, and I recall from my wonderful experience when I was younger, that yes experience is that the universe responds with a yes, that the universe, there's a very personal relationship with it, is the only way that I see it. And I think, and the last few months, and as I was saying, I was digging back through my YouTube, and even the way I was going into a bit of my journeying was like, right, what's I must understand analytically what's happening here. And something has allowed me to actually just go, yeah, that's great. But actually just embracing and being open is a far more exciting and remarkable way of, engaging with it. So
yeah, it's what it means. It's the meaning. And really, that's kind of what we are, even though we might not realize it, that's kind of what we're searching for in our lives, is that sense of meaning, because it actually, makes you feel alive. And I'm glad to hear that, you are living in this way again, that you've kind of, got back onto that pathway and to yourself, really. It's
absolutely. No,
yeah,
you're right, to myself. And it's
yeah,
I mentioned again the discovery of Patrick Harpur and the real immersion in the writing, because I'm a creative person who's built my life about using my imagination, but using it. And all of a sudden, I'm really, I think that's where this sort of enervating, sort of tired, habitual view was, that as what have I done with my creativity? I've used the imagination to as a tool rather than as the true wellspring for, who I am. So
yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm feeling very touched by, moved by your story, and I'm feeling very inspired also. Uh, yeah, a lot of meditations I've been doing recently, I'm just feeling just that is the kind of the moving forward and finding that flow. And when you find that flow within yourself. And I agree that there is something that hopefully you can start off with as a child. So, really thinking about trying to create environments like that for my children as well, because it's important.
absolutely, it's yeah, and again, it really mirrors back as you become a parent.
Yeah.
You know how it is as you're a parent, when all of a sudden you're going through your own, the act of being a parent brings back so much of your own childhood, and yet these strange responsibilities that go with you, which can make you just go, the kind of the more practical side, when actually to get back to true play. I think that's the thing that's come from this, is for me, it's that realization that imagination and play, are where the universe comes to life in so many ways that it's almost impossible to put into words.
Sure is. And the guy himself sounded very playful. And I think, my interactions with these beings, most of them have been, there's a sense of play. So I agree that it's kind of the universe speaking to us in some way. I mean, I don't know. And I'm not saying that's the answer, that these beings are the universe speaking to us in some way, but it kind of feels like that in a lot of these cases. It does feel like that. And you responded. And so thank you again for, for sharing your story. And I know that other people do have interesting experiences while they're hiking, and when they are kind of at one with nature in some way. Perhaps it's the only bit of their lives where they've had some time to themselves for a long time, because our lives are so busy nowadays. And so this is when, things can start to sort of loosen up, and we start to receive these messages or have these interactions. So I'm interested in following up this line of other people like yourself who have had these kinds of experiences, and it might be nice to sort of put you in touch with one another too.
Yeah.
But well, thank you for your time, and Yeah, I really appreciate it. Very much
Thank
so.
you, Jo.
I'd like to speak again sometime. And yeah, it was really lovely to meet you too. And I'd like to hear how things develop for you, because it sounds like maybe there's even some more meaning behind this about what you're going to be doing here in your life. It could be something like that. So I'd really like to
Yeah.
hear about that.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
keep in touch.